So in the previous video, I picked up this Dell Optiplex 3050 for $80 on the old eBay. Came with an i5 7500, 1 terabyte mechanical drive, and 8 gigs of memory, DDR4 2400, single channel. Wasn't too bad for 80 bucks. So as is, the computer was not fit for pretty much anything but office, but wanted to play a couple of games on it. So for about $160 that we put into it, I was able to get 16 gigs of DDR4 2400 RAM. I was also able to pop in a graphics card, a 1650, a 240 gig solid state drive, and for about $240, this thing performed very well. 1080p, high settings, 60 frames per second, most AAA titles, and it served itself very well. But like most OEM computers, Dell, HP, Lenovo, it has its limitations and about took it as far as we can take it. And the biggest limitation is the power supply. It's only 240 watts. It doesn't have supplemental power for a better graphics cards, and because of that, you're kind of limited on the graphics cards that we can use. Now there are some hacks where you can put in a SATA to 6-pin adapter, but 240 watts, I mean, the best thing that you're hoping to pop in here is a 1650, 1050 Ti, maybe a 1060, but I don't like to dance around that 240 watt limit. So in today's video, I'm going to be cutting, grinding, spray painting, taping, upgrading all the parts, and really trying to see how much I can max out this computer and give it a little custom touch on it. And I'll show you how you can do this. Let's get started and talk about what we're going to do. All right, so let's talk about what I'm planning to do. So the first thing first, the i5 7500, noble, honorable mention at best, but let's see if we could do better. So now initially I wanted to go with the i7 7700, which would have been more ideal, but those things are still going for like $150, $160. So next best thing that we can do is go with the i7 6700. Slightly slower, 6th gen versus 7th gen, but still an improvement. They're going for about $60 to $80 when the i7 7700 is going for about, geez man, I've seen them as high as about $150. So it's a little outside the price budget. I'd rather have the i7 7700, but at least I'll have an upgrade path later. Memory, because of course RGB cells. I actually picked this up on the marketplace. This was probably about 40 bucks. Thermaltake Tough RAM. DDR, this is 16 gigs, DDR4 3200, 16, 18, 18. I mean, it's not the best, but for 40 bucks, it's actually not that bad. And I've used this memory before, works pretty good. And it has RGB. So for storage, I picked this up. This is a 500 gig M.2. This is XPG, also has RGB because like I said, guys, RGB, more frames per second. Why not, right? And this should be fine, and I'll actually be able to delete that SSD, mechanical drive, make more space in here, and kind of clean it up because we're going to be adding more wires and bigger components. Now, we are going to be upgrading the graphics cards, but we need more power. And honestly, guys, as small as this is, you're not going to be able to put a traditional power supply in it. So we're going to have to go SFX. Pick this up on the old Amazon, one of those refurbished, and I paid $50 for it. It's a SFX 80 Gold Plus, 750 watt. And check out how small this guy is. It's pretty cool. For the price, it's perfect. And with some slight cutting and modding, which I'm going to show you guys how to do it, we should be able to get that in there to work and definitely power up our graphics card. Now for the graphics card, I was going to go with a GTX 1070. I actually picked this one up because, you know, the whole Ethereum thing going on where the merge, whatever, I don't care. But pretty much they're reaping what they sowed, and now they're selling their graphics cards, hoping trying to recoup a little bit money. And I was able to pick this one up for 80 bucks. It's GTX 1070, and I was going to use this, but then this guy popped up pretty cheap on the marketplace. Picked this up for 180. It's a RTX 3060, and that's going to be fantastic in here. And one is, well, it's about the same size, slightly smaller, more power, better bang for the buck. So now cooling, we're going to have to cool this thing. We're adding more heat, more power, and this thing is a little hot box. It's kind of sealed up, the whole front or side panel. If you look at it, that's it, and it's like that all the way around. And all you have is this one little 80mm fan. You have this Mickey Mouse heat sink, which it's okay for the i3, i5, but an i7, I'm not gonna mess with that. So this is what I came up with, and I love this cooler. I love using it. It works fantastic. Cooler Master i71C. And the cool thing about this cooler is number one, it's got RGB, which is nice. So what's cool about this is that the mounting holes is the same as what Dell uses for their fans. So you don't have to actually use this bracket. It actually screws into their holes, and I'll show you guys how to do that later. And also, she's gonna need to breathe. Now, putting a fan in the front may not be feasible. I mean, I'm entertaining cutting this out and we're kind of brainstorming this together, but there's really nowhere for this thing to get fresh air. So this is what I'm thinking. Pick this up, and I think this will work fantastic. So I'm thinking for the side panel, and I've done loose measurements and it should work. I'm gonna go ahead and cut openings, pop this in just like over here. Number one, it's gonna look better, but number two, it's gonna give me a lot more airflow. So when that when that CPU fan is sucking in air, it's gonna be sucking in from here. The graphics card is going to actually have room to breathe and suck in fresh air. So I think that should help us a lot more with cooling efficiency, just getting more fresh air in there. We'll try to see what we do in the front. You got the speaker over here, which we'll figure that out as we get there. I might be able to put a 80mm fan in there, which should work good on that. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And of course, extra RGB and this adapter. So now if you're going to be changing the power supply on this Dell, you're going to need this adapter right over here. I'll show you when we get to that, when we put this all together, and this will allow me to use a typical power supply in there. That way we can power up our graphics card. So I got a lot of work to do, but it should be fun, and that's the fun and enjoyment of PC modding, PC building, and just kind of customizing it. Take this old Optiplex and give it a fresh look and new life. So now the first thing I need to do is, and I talked about this in the last video, we got to create clearance for the new graphics card. So the issue that we're going to run into is that the PCI Express power can hit against this, because the new graphics card we're going to have is going to be slightly bigger. So we're going to need to make some room, and this is where the cutting comes in. Now if I'm looking at it, if you see this line right over here, I think what we can go ahead and do is just kind of cut all this out right over here and potentially cut the same thing right over here. So I'm going to probably cut this whole section, and I'm just going to draw this just for my reference. And probably cut it to about right over here. What we'll be able to do is actually keep the mounting for the SSD and the mechanical drive if you choose to have that, or if you need more space. But the focus of this is actually to make more room for our bigger and better graphics cards. So that's where we're going to cut. Now if you look for our power supply, it's kind of small, and yeah, they didn't kind of leave us any room. Now I have seen people just go ahead and just kind of mount it, but then it's going to block all this airflow in. I don't want the power supply getting hot. So what we're going to have to do is we're just going to have to continue the line over here, do some measurements on this, and just kind of trace it just like so, and cut it accordingly where we could drill holes where we have mounting holes. I want this to mount securely, but I also want it to have good ventilation for these holes. So I'll probably come up with some type of template with some tape it off over here, get some measurements, and kind of get the holes so I could drill some holes right in here. That way I can use the screws, it's mount, and it's secure. So now the first thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and just take everything out and gut this case. Actually only took like 5 minutes to do, but I got everything out. So now I have my canvas. So this is what I'm thinking about cutting, just cutting this over here. So the only thing about this is just it's the instructions, but I mean at that point, I should know how to use this case already. But by cutting that out right over there, that's going to give me the clearance to put a bigger graphics card and make sure I have the clearance for the cables for it. Now you can cut more out, delete the 3.5-inch hard drive cage and the 2.5-inch drive cage, but I'm not going to do a window on this. And I thought about doing a plexiglass window or glass window or whatever they call it, or whatever type there is, but I'm more focused on the airflow, and the only way I'm going to get the airflow that I need is by cutting this out. So that's the plan. This is why you plan carefully, folks. Got to looking at it, and I want to be able to get the most airflow I can out of here. I really don't want any obstructions or anything for that matter. So I kind of loosely laid this thing on, and I started kind of getting into place because, like I said, I want the CPU to be able to suck in fresh air from over here. Same thing for the graphics card. I mean, even though it's kind of getting it from this general area over here, I still want to make sure that it's open so it has access to fresh air. But anyways, so I kind of mocked it up of where I wanted to be more or less, and then I realized that all this right over here is going to be blocking it. Initially I was just going to cut off this center section right over here, but now that I'm adding this, number one, I think it would look funny, and number two, it kind of defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to achieve. So measuring it, it looks like what I'm going to have to do is cut it from this line right over here, which is slightly above the grill, and the same thing slightly below the grill. And what that will do is that will open all this up over here, fresh airflow, no obstruction, and it would look better. If I wasn't doing this, adding this part, I would just cut this piece out, but I'm gonna have to cut that. Now some may worry about it might be an obstruction, might be a weakness. Now some may worry that you're jeopardizing the case integrity. This panel is pretty solid, and then when I put this piece on here, it's also going to reinforce it over here. And this case is pretty stout as it is, and this piece is just very flimsy. So here's to nothing. It's not the prettiest, but the key thing to remember is that we're not using tempered glass. It's all about airflow and practicality. So the grinder was probably a little more aggressive, but my Dremel's not working right, and it's having a hard time cutting this metal. And by the time I would have cut it with all those metal cutting bits for the Dremel, I probably would have been bankrupt on this project. But I was able to cut everything I need to make sure that I have no obstructions and preserve the DVD feature of it. So now when I put this on, when I have the panel that I'm going to drill onto, it's going to look like this. And as you can see, the only thing that we probably see is that little blue piece, which I'll probably paint that black to match inside. But that's that little piece that kind of snaps the DVD drive in. But it's going to look like that, no obstructions, and you won't even see these imperfect cuts. And by the time I finish grinding them and spray paint this black, it's going to look good. So now let's go to the side panel. Now for the side panel, goes on kind of like this, and this is where I kind of need to find where I want this at, where I'm still going to get the best airflow, and it don't look too bad. So if I look, I probably got about 1/2 inch over here, and that goes right over there, so maybe about 1/2 inch probably on the greater side. And then if I look on the top, yeah, maybe about another 1/2 inch. So yeah, about 1/2 inch will put me where I need. I'm actually going to go with 3/4. I think 3/4 is probably going to be a lot better, because I got to remember this doesn't sit flush like the other piece does, so there is some extra room. 3/4 would play it safe. So I'll put a mark there. Kind of gives me where this is going to be, which is going to be right over here, which I'm good with that. Now the key thing to remember is I can't cut this opening to the exact size of this, because I'm going to need this mounting holes right here. So I'm going to have to go to the grills and use that. So whatever the distance between here and here is, and here is, that's going to be my entrance for my airflow. And then the excess, I could drill a hole right through there, and then that will mount it to the panel. So I think that's going to work. All right, with a little help for the missus, because she's got better hands than I do, I was actually able to trace this out. So the way I figured it out is that I want to be 3/4 of an inch from here to here, and that will actually clear this little area over here. You won't see it, and because this piece lays on the top, it's going to be fine. And then we were able to figure out the height for the top and the bottom. So this will mount over here, just like so. We trace the dimensions of this, and then we mark the holes. So I'll be able to drill the 2 holes over here, 2 holes on the top for the screws, and that'll be fine. And then what we went ahead and did is for the inside, so we could get the most ventilation, we went ahead and just measured these right over here, and this is going to be where I cut it out. Just cut out in a square. It'll be fine. You won't see any of the imperfections over here, and then we'll have our ventilation. So this is ready for the cut, and then we'll do the spray paint on it. So now for the next order of business is we got to get this power supply mounted in there. So now if you look, yeah, that's not going to be enough. I don't want to block it, and also it's going to block the port right over here. So what I'm thinking is, the good thing about it is that they give you 3 holes over here, 3 holes for this. This is the EVGA 750 GM, And what I'm thinking that I'm going to do is mount it this way. That way the fan is not being obstructed. It'll have airflow from inside the case and from that little vent that we put in. And I'll be able to get the screw right over there. So I'll use this screw as a reference, run a piece of tape over here to find out where the screw is, cut the excess I need, and then drill a little hole on each side so I can have better mounting for it. I'm going to use this piece of tape right over here, just like so. It's not perfect, but it'll get me close enough. Actually, I think the better way to do it is actually going to be over here. Because this is raised, it's going to change my dimensions. So I could use this right over here. Yeah, that's going to be better. And use these top holes. So I got the hole right over here lined up where that meets on the power supply. Kind of follow the straight edge right over here through the tape, and then I can use this. Just kind of let it bleed through. Now to kind of make sure that I'm not overshooting it, let's measure from here to there, which is going to be 4.5 inches roughly. Yeah, 4.5 inches. So with that being said, I'm looking at about roughly 1/4 inch that I'm gonna have to cut over. So just kind of mark it right over here. And I'm probably gonna give it a little more. If a couple of vent holes are blocked, it's not a big deal. A good majority of them are gonna be open. So I have my mark over here. I'll do another mark over there. And then I'll cut this along this line right up here. Go to the 1/4+1 mark, and then I'll take a drill bit, drill a small enough hole where I could get the screw for the power supply in, and that should work. So let's get to cutting. Good enough for the girls I hang out with. Mistake. That's alright. It's on the back. You won't see it. But at least I got everything else I wanted to do. So let's mock up this power supply and see if we can get the screws. I worked out pretty good. And honestly, I'm just going to leave it with these 2 screws because this thing is pretty light. And honestly, it's not going anywhere. So I'm good with that. So let's move on to the next cut. I hate using this machine, but gotta do what you gotta do. It don't look bad. Looks pretty good. Except when you take this part off. Ooh. Having trouble with the old equipment today. Might be time to get some new blades and figure some better tactics out. But this is going to cover it. You won't see that. So I'll just drill the holes over here, and then I'll be able to mount this on. I like it. It looks good. I'll get better screws over here, and this thing will look way better. Very happy how that came out. So everything's cut. Everything's ready to go. So now the fun part. Let's go to the montage. Let's do some sanding, painting, clean this up, put this back together, and let's have some fun. Well, 3 days later, and she's done. And I like the way it came out. I love the colors. So I went with the Chrysler blue just because, well, I'm a Mopar guy. But then I ran out of that, and that paint was like $15, and I didn't really feel like spending extra money on it. So I had some old Ford blue lying around, and I kind of like the contrast of it. Yes, I know Chrysler and Ford, they probably shouldn't be together, but they work good for the Optiplex. Now, the biggest thing is adding this right over here. We're upgrading to an i7 6700 and an RTX 3060. It kind of produces a lot of heat, so we had to kind of get rid of that heat. Now the front, there's not a lot of room to really add a fan in the front, especially when you tuck in all the wires over here. I tried adding a fan a few times, and I kept on running into the issue where the wires kept on hitting the fan. It was too thick. It was more trouble than what it's worth. So sticking with this, I ran AIDA 64. My CPU temps, the highest it got was 80 degrees, and Heaven Benchmark with the GPU, the highest it got was about 72, 73 degrees. Now keep that in mind that I am in my garage, and today is a hot day. It is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's pretty warm. So typically in my house, our temperature is about 72, 73. I think the highest is 75 degrees Celsius with the AC, so that would kind of help bring these temps down and make it a lot better. Now, AIDA 64 and Heaven Benchmark is like a torture test for the GPU and the CPU. So while gaming, playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider and even Fortnite, my temperatures were about 5 to 8 degrees lower. The fans did ramp down more, so gaming on this was ideal, and having that ventilation made a huge difference. So I was able to play my games, and I didn't really have any thermal throttling going on. Now opening it up, it is tight, but the SFX power supply makes it possible, and the fact that we went with the M.2, getting rid of the SATA cables completely, also kind of helped with the room aspect of it. Now cutting away this, which is the 2.5-inch hard drive cage and also part of the 3.5-inch, gives us the room for better airflow and allows me to put this graphics card in there. Like I said, 8.5, probably 10 inches would be pushing it, but at least I have plenty of room for the graphics card that I decide to use. Now our Cooler Master i71C definitely does the job. Gives us the whole RGB, which gives us more frames per second. And another thing I was big on was I really wanted to keep the whole DVD writer drive on it. Number one, it kind of just pays tribute to the whole Dell Optiplex Office thing, and it's handy to have. Now the one thing I will say that you need to kind of keep in mind is, if you notice, the graphics card is kind of flickering in and out, and it's not a fault of the graphics card. It's not a bad graphics card, and what it is that this whole mounting, because of the way this graphics card, it's kind of dancing in the slot, so anytime I move it, it disrupts it, and I tend to lose my signal. So the best way would probably be to do it is just kind of screw a screw in there, maybe drill one of these holes out, put a screw to kind of secure it more firmly, and that would kind of hopefully eliminate that issue. I did test the graphics card in another computer just to make sure that it wasn't the issue, but I found that every time I rock this or move this slightly, the graphics card moves, as I mean, there's nothing holding it. So something to keep in mind if you're going to do this. So I'm very happy with the way this thing came out. A few things I would do different. Number one, which I will fix, is secure this graphics card better by getting screws in there. I probably, like I said, drill a hole, and that should take care of it, and I'll be able to secure it. Because right now, if I move it, I end up losing my video and having glitches in the computer. The other thing, definitely not use that big grinder. Just use the Dremel tool, as that would have given me a lot cleaner cuts, and this would have looked a lot better. And the other thing I'd probably do is upgrade it to an i7 7700. Maybe I could find one on a bargain deal, or find another Optiplex that they were throwing it out, or find some way that's actually a lot cheaper, because I'm not willing to spend $140 for an i7 7700. Now, as far as the price and what I got into it, I'm roughly at about $450. Here's why. The 3060, got it for local miner who's selling all his cards out, and I was able to pick up his last 3060 for $200, plus the $80 I spent for this, plus all the other miscellaneous stuff. But not to mention, I was able to actually take that i5 7500, flip it for about $50 along with that 1 terabyte for about $10. So it puts my cost about $400 to $450. I'll post it on the screen, the exact prices, but that's where I'm out for it. And it's not bad considering that 3060 has good life and will definitely transplant and last into a newer build. Now, was it worth it? Absolutely. Number one, I like modding and building computers. What better way to take something like this, give it your own little custom touch? That's the fun, that's the enjoyment, and that's kind of why we get into computers. I mean, there's nothing wrong with modding it. It's the same way of taking an old Honda and putting some rims on it and a spoiler and stuff like that. Kind of the same thing. I mean, we mod our cars, we mod everything we can. Why not mod our own computers? So, and I enjoy that aspect, plus the content, and it's just fun to do. So Guys, let me know. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, suggestions, things that would have been better, questions, opinions. I definitely appreciate it, as it helps me to get new ideas and work forward towards the next project. If you like this video, definitely hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel, as doing these things definitely help me to keep doing these types of projects, to share with you how it's done, suggestions, and how easy that you guys can do it too. A little elbow grease, a couple of hand tools, and I was able to turn it into this, along with getting these parts from the used marketplace such as Facebook and eBay and a couple of other ones that I use. So thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see what we come up with next.